Where did the vast array of diverse human languages come from? Secular ancient historians teach that a large volume of complex languages appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, in the mid-3rd millennium BC. This is one statement you can believe from the ancient historians, as it aligns perfectly with Genesis 11. Unlike many important events in the Bible doesn't date the Babel rebellion with certainty, but it does leave some tantalizing clues. The Bible declares Babel was the location of the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom. So we know Nimrod was alive, established, and commencing his power authority over the people starting at Babel. Jewish tradition even has Nimrod commissioning the building of the tower. Nimrod was a great-grandson of Noah through Ham, but the Bible records no specific dates for Nimrod's birth. By far the largest clue as to the date of the Babel dispersion is given in relation to the man Peleg, the 3 times great-grandson of Noah through Shem, his father being Eber, the first Hebrew. Eber's son was Peleg, a name meaning division, born in approximately 2466 BC, exactly 100 years after the end of the flood. Why would you name your son Division? Well, the clue is in Genesis 10:25. The baby was so named Division, Peleg, because in his days the earth was divided. And since most people are named at their birth, it would seem 2466 BC is a reasonable guess for the time of the dispersion. Nimrod being from 2 generations prior, you could reasonably assume him old enough to have begun his rise to prominence. So my first guess for the year of, the origination of, the array of complex human languages is the year 2466 BC. But I also realise it's possible for the name Peleg to have become synonymous with the division later in Peleg's 239-year life. Let's get into our manuscript text for today, Genesis 11, starting at verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. It's worth noting, the whole earth is a reference to all the people of the earth. The earth itself has no language. It's the people of the earth that use language. I say this as I'm a Bible literalist, which means I take the Bible at face value. If the plain, simple, straightforward reading of the text makes sense, then I accept that literal, straightforward sense. But we must recognise there are a range of writing styles employed in the Bible: poetry, allegory, hyperbole, historic narrative, apocalyptic, anthropomorphic, simile, metaphor, etc., etc. There can also be intentional, multiple meanings layered into scriptural passages. Bible literalists can often be unfairly painted as too stiff, too wooden, not understanding different writing styles. Liberal critics of Bible literalists accuse us of not using basic common sense. But we Bible literalists do use some common sense and reason in our interpretive or hermeneutic method. What we don't tend to do is allegorize an inconvenient passage into non-existence, as the liberal Bible interpreter often does. Verse 2, and it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. So Noah and his family gradually migrated east away from the ark. This doesn't mean every single person alive at the time moved to the land of Shinar, but the suggestion is a significant portion of the family of Noah, likely including Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, migrated to the Mesopotamian valley. From ancient records, this land was once a rich, fertile plain, fantastic for farming, able to support huge populations of people. And the subsequent centuries have seen a dramatic shift in the climate of this region, and likely intensive, long-term over-farming resulted in a degradation of the soil. Today, Shinar looks more semi-arid, bordering on desert conditions. Shinar is the land of two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. The flooding of these rivers resulted in the plain of Shinar in these ancient times being covered in rich alluvial soil. So we've got plenty of drinking water, two rivers for transport, rich soils for farming, a climatic Goldilocks zone. No wonder they chose this location. Verse 3. Then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone and they had asphalt for mortar. There's clearly a consensus of opinion. They agreed to make and bake bricks to construct permanent dwelling places in this rich, fertile plain. From the previous chapter we learned this is the place where Nimrod began to rule. He rose to prominence in this place. So Nimrod could well have been influential in the decision to build both Babel and the Tower of Babel. But Nimrod is not the king commanding everyone. Perhaps he's one prominent voice amongst a wider consensus. So they wisely agree to use what they have, bricks and asphalt, both things they could manufacture from the local natural resources. The emphasis on thoroughly. The thoroughly baked bricks suggest stronger and durable oven-fired bricks rather than more brittle sun-dried bricks. Verse 4, and they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." This verse is laced with subtle condemnation of their actions. The "let us" of the people is contrasted against the "let us" of God a few verses later, setting up the implied, though not outright stated, tension of man's will versus God's will. You see, there was nothing wrong with building a city or a tower, but what was motivating their desire? They wanted a tower reaching into the heavens. Is it just possible they built this tower thinking to escape a future watery judgment of God? If this was in their thoughts, they clearly were not trusting in God's promise to never again destroy the earth by water. Were they building this tower maybe with a thought of reaching up to God, reaching up to the levels of heaven, becoming godlike themselves? Did they have intentions to create a tower to worship a false god? They certainly were building this tower and this city with an intention of elevating their names. In other words, self-worship. Humans, since these ancient times, have raised monuments that would see them remembered long after their passing. What we do know from Scripture is Babel, or Babylon, is the symbolic place of spiritual opposition to God. The Bible can be viewed as a book of two cities. Both of these cities are introduced to us in Genesis. And we see the final conclusion of these two cities in the book of Revelation. Jerusalem is the city of God, the apple of God's eye, the place of true worship of God, an eternal city. Babylon is the place of spiritual opposition to God, Satan's city, the origin of all antediluvian false religion, a city doomed for destruction. Babel was the place where the masses came together and said, "Let us defy the will of God." So Babel is the post-Diluvian origin of mass rebellion against God. It's the origin of man-made religion. Let us. God told our fathers to fill the earth, spread out across the world. But these people wanted to resist the spreading out. They saw God's command as a scattering, harmful to their personal interests. Verse 5. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. This is classic anthropomorphic language. Upon first reading, you'd assume God was far away, sitting in heaven, clueless what man was doing on earth. So he came down from the heavens to view the human actions firsthand. He seems surprised, even worried at what the humans had accomplished in such a short space of time. But we know from Scripture, God is omnipresent. He's not far away in heaven, he's everywhere. And God is omniscient, he knows all things. So rather, this Scripture is written in such a way that we can easily relate to the perspective of God. Mankind is capable of extensive evil. Not evil that threatens God in any way, no way, but evil that threatens the best interests of man. God's language confusion, which is about to come, is then rightly understood as God intervening to save man from his worst inclinations. I think we're rapidly approaching a point in this 21st century where the evil intents, thoughts and ideas of mankind are reaching levels dangerous for the future of man. Nothing we propose to do will be withheld from us, it seems. We see the rapid rise of the alphabet mafia to undermine the God-ordained family unit. The insane trans agenda to mutilate and sexualize children. The mass murder of babies, with over 1 million abortions per week worldwide. The rise of AI and the dangers this imposes to humanity. We're only just starting to wake up to those dangers. The rapid, recent march towards a cashless society. The advancement of tech to the point now that we've reversed the God-imposed language dispersion of Babel. What about the rise of tyrannical overreaching governments, as best demonstrated during the orchestrated 3-year COVID scare campaign that was so successful? The rise of Islamic terrorism, Islamic fundamentalism, and the dangers this creates to civilization. The insane new woke agenda infesting and capturing our governments and corporations, from which arises one crazed demonic idea rapidly after the next, each more poisonous to a stable society than the previous idea. What about the rise of climate alarmism? It's no longer climate change or global warming. The latest lie is global boiling. This lunatic green agenda has otherwise intelligent people willing to implode their economies, societies and living standards and businesses so they can virtue signal their stupidity to like-minded morons around the globe. What we've observed in the last decade is unchecked human depravity, accelerating to a point where God needs and God must soon intervene. Verse 7, come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. In verse 4, we saw the earthly us, the carnal us, the human us. In verse 7, we see the counter us, the heavenly us, the righteous us, the triune us, intervening in what seems a harsh and harmful way, a judgmental way. But in effect, the triune us is intervening in a loving way, a way that will remove the intensification of evil, delay the ultimate end state of man, which is corruption unchecked, rampant throughout the world. God in his grace pauses the building of Babylon, pauses the cancerous growth of unchecked evil in this central one location and place. He paused the idea of Babylon to be judged with finality at a later date. And in pausing Babylon, he spared humanity the violent wrath it deserved at that time, setting that wrath aside until the appointed day when he'll pour out his wrath on the earth dwellers before his second coming. After nearly 4,500 years of post-Diluvian history, I believe we've reached the point of near complete corruption. The cup of mankind's iniquity is near full to overflowing. We see this corruption even infesting our churches, something Jesus warned us about in his Matthew 13 mystery parable discourse. We're rapidly approaching the time of the rapture of the church, followed by the great apostasy, then the revealing of Antichrist, then the commencement of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. During this time of tribulation, Babylon will reconstitute. It will coalesce into one united, ecumenical, worldwide religion of manifest rebellion against God. Then at the end of this tribulation, just before the second coming, God will judge both spiritual Babylon and physical Babylon with total, complete, and eternal obliteration, which you can read about in Revelation 17 and 18. And in Revelation 18, I'll read a few verses for you. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her, when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city, in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. Verse 9. Therefore its name is called Babel, or confusion, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Creation scientists' best guess is that God divided humans into approximately 70 to 90 different people groups, with original, new, complex, fully complete languages embedded supernaturally into the minds of men. And this explains why, out of nowhere, the explosion of new, fully formed, complex languages occurred in the mid-3rd millennium BC. It was a divine intervention of God, you see, to force mankind against their will to comply with his original directive to fill the earth. And in so doing, he delayed his judgment against Babylon till the time of the second coming of Jesus. But this Babel's spirit of rebellion against God has been present in all subsequent societies since this time. It will coalesce into one final evil ecumenical form during Daniel's final week to be judged with finality. Now, I'll leave you to engage in this exercise of pronouncing difficult names, the names on screen. But take particular note of the rapidly diminishing ages with each progressive generation. Just before the flood, God declares that he will limit the lifespan of man to no more than 120 years. Individuals living for centuries seem to intensify the progression of evil. It took little more than 1.5 millennia for God to finally wipe out the evil that humans had filled the original earth with. Approximately 4.5 millennia later, we approach another day of judgment, due to the evil and violence we filled this post-Diluvian world with. It took us a little longer than the antediluvians, but I strongly believe we've reached the point of no return. Reading the signs of the times as Jesus has told us to do, I believe his righteous judgment is now due on this wicked and violent generation of mankind. And until our next study, may God richly bless you all.